A potential primary challenge in a Massachusetts Senate race. The chair of the Massachusetts Democratic Party is here this morning to talk about it and more. Let's go on the record.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to OTR. I'm Ed Hardy.
And I'm Ben Simoneau. Joining us today is Steve Kerrigan, the Massachusetts Democratic Party chair. Steve, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Great to see you, Steve.
Yeah,
Thanks for coming in this morning. So let's start with what we were just talking about, the potential field for the Democratic Senate primary and potential challengers to Senator Ed Markey. Now, he's not on the ballot, obviously, this November, but he's coming up next year. Congressman Seth Moulton is reportedly seriously considering a challenge. Congressman Jake Auchincloss says he will not join the race. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley hasn't ruled anything out and has not endorsed anyone. So at the national level, we just saw a presidential election that did not have a competitive primary process. So would voters and the party benefit from a primary, from a Senate primary?
First, I think voters always benefit from good competition, and we've had plenty of it here in Massachusetts. And we've got an incredible congressional delegation. As you just pointed out, there's a lot of unknowns related to this story. And as party chair, my job is to make sure a Democrat wins in November and that every Democrat along the way has the resources they need to win an effective campaign and make sure that we're promoting democratic values and democratic ideals. If there is a campaign, a primary campaign, which there may be, we'll watch with great interest and just support whoever the nominee is.
So Senator Ed Markey is 79 years old right now. He'll turn 80 next summer. He'll be 80, which means by the time his new Senate term would begin, 86 at the end of that potential 6-year Senate term. Is that too old to run?
No. I think it's up to the voters of Massachusetts to decide that, and they will make that decision when they get to the voting box.
We did just see a presidential election that Ed pointed out that featured two octogenarian or nearly octogenarian candidates. I think if there was one takeaway from the voters across the political spectrum, they wanted generational change and they didn't have an option for it. Are you worried that that's a problem here in Massachusetts? Is it time?
Well, first, in the presidential election, they did have an option for it. There were other candidates running earlier.
Not in the general.
Not in the general, no.
Right.
Our process is what it is, and that's what will play out here in Massachusetts. Any number of candidates could join Senator Markey on the primary ballot and make their case to the voters of Massachusetts. I have all the confidence in the world that the voters will make the right decision and will send a Democrat to the United States Senate, whether it's Ed Markey or not. Is up for the voters to decide.
It was what? How many years ago? 5 years ago almost. So, and Senator Markey knocked out a Kennedy. Does that still have power and weight now? Here we are, almost 6 years later.
Well, the argument was made back then that the voters wanted a generational change, and they reelected Ed Markey. So, I think we're blessed here in Massachusetts to have one of the best congressional delegations in the entire country. We have fantastic statewide leaders, all of whom are Democrats, an incredible mayor and Mayor Wu, and mayors all across Massachusetts, fighting for the people of their communities. And whoever ends up in the United States Senate in early 2027 will do just that and will be a Democrat.
All right, so the Democratic Party has a big task in front of it. Republicans right now, as you know, control the White House, both houses, both chambers of Congress. The midterms just a little over a year away.
401 days.
Oh, there you go. All right. So what is the key to success here for Democrats in these midterms? I mean, Massachusetts can't possibly send any more Democrats to Washington.
We try. If they want to give us extra seats, we're glad to take them.
New England barely could as well.
Right.
Susan Collins, is the senator from Maine, is the last Republican in New England in Congress.
We'll take care of that in 2026.
So should the party tack toward the center or turn farther left?
The party should continue to do what we have been doing for a while now. And I will say, look, 2024 knocked everybody off their feet. There was clearly a message sent by voters that they weren't feeling connected to the vision and the message of the Democratic Party. And at least this leader in the Democratic Party heard that. We've been working very hard. Here in Massachusetts, we have been talking to voters. We've done congressional listening tours long before people were doing town halls. We've established 15 new town committees across Massachusetts in red communities and purple communities. We've been winning elections and been doing that across the country. You know, when Democrats have been on elections, about 45 elections, I think, since November of last year across the country, Democrats have outperformed in all but one, by sometimes 15, 16 points, and been swinging seats, particularly in Iowa, where they swung 2 Republican state Senate seats and pushed Joni Ernst out of the Senate. Senate. So there is work to be done. But the theme of our convention a couple of weeks ago was don't agonize, organize. And that's what the Democratic Party has to do, is organize and get our message out.
But I want to ask you, so you said you heard the message from voters.
Yeah.
What was it about the Democrats' message? Was it the border? Was it inflation? Was it those kitchen table economic issues? Because frankly, you point to all these races across the country, but Republicans here in Massachusetts have been doing better than they've been doing in decades.
Yeah, well, I can push back on that. They don't currently hold a statewide office or any congressional seats.
Well, they don't, but they haven't in decades.
Quite a while,
but they do have more seats in the legislature, and they've won some seats that people thought were blue for a long time and never would change hands.
Sure, yeah, I'm glad to stick up for the supermajorities we have on Beacon Hill and our all-Democratic delegation. But what I think we failed to do as a party between 2016 and 2024, and I think that's generally across the Democratic Party in the country, was to figure out what made a Trump voter in the first place, what that sort of disaffected nature was. And clearly, to me, and I advise candidates and anybody I talk to, that people want to hear you talk about issues that they care about. And every issue that people care about is the economy, their livelihood. You don't win elections by telling people how to feel. And we spent a lot of time in 2024 telling people how to feel. We have to listen to people about the issues that they care about and talk to them about what we as a party are going to do, which, by the way, conversely to what the Republican Party is going to do. Like Governor Healey's been working tirelessly to make our Commonwealth more affordable. President Trump is doing everything to make things more out of reach for average, everyday Americans. And I will stand by what the Democratic Party is doing to fight for a more affordable economy, for a stronger country against what Donald Trump and his brand of leadership.
You mentioned a few minutes ago Mayor Wu. And so in specific local races, support lined up behind Boston's Mayor Michelle Wu. She's running unopposed on the ballot in November. While in Somerville's mayoral race, the incumbent did not make it past the primary election. Is there anything at all, because I know those are more local than statewide or nationwide, anything to learn from the voters, who the voters are picking from those two specific examples?
Primaries or preliminary elections always are going to go to the edge of a party's spectrum. And then typically people come back more toward the center in a general election. So it's not surprising that you're seeing some of those election results. I think Mayor Wu's result is different than what might have happened in Somerville. It's not, but I'm not super surprised by what happened in Somerville. It's a very progressive, very left-leaning community, and those folks are going to show out and vote in that preliminary election. They did.
You mentioned the Democratic Party convention a couple of weeks ago was held out in Springfield, and it included a debate over a new platform or sticking with many of the principles that were decided back in 2021. So what is your reaction to what actually happened?
I thought it was great. It was a raucous debate at times,
which is good.
Which is good. That's who we are as a party. The other party is the one that says, believe in these three things or you're out. We are a very big tent party, and what you saw on the floor of that convention was a passionate group of delegates who wanted to have their voice heard. As I was saying, just like the voters want to see themselves reflected in the work that we're doing, so did our delegates. And in the end, our job going into that convention was to leave with a platform. We did, and we left with one that reflected the views of the delegates there. And I'm proud of the work that we did. I'm also proud of the work that was done leading up to the convention. So
I want to ask you a question. You mentioned the supermajorities on Beacon Hill. So let's talk about Beacon Hill for a second. Democrats have controlled both chambers forever. The governor now is approaching her finishing her third year in office, so she's 3/4 of the way or so through her term. We still have some of the highest energy bills in the nation, some of the most expensive housing costs in the nation. I know some of this is controlled by Washington, but we have very expensive grocery prices. Are Democrats doing enough here, fast enough to say, we are making a change? Because I will tell you, a lot of voters don't feel that.
Yeah, so look, I'm glad you brought it up. First, the governor passed the first tax cuts of any governor in 20 years in her first year in office. She's passed an effort of $5.1 billion investment in housing. When she inherited the corner office or won the corner office in 2022, we were behind by at least 225,000 units of housing, which of course leads to increased housing and decreased affordability. They're on track they've got 100,000 units that are already in the process of being built now of the 225 they're working on. So it's not going to happen overnight. It also is not going to happen with a president who doesn't believe in an all or nothing energy solution to how we're going to deal with the energy costs that that the people in New England face. And what she does, rather than turn her back on other energy solutions, is she gathers people together. She gathered all of the Eastern governors, except for Kelly Ayotte, she didn't come, and Canadian premiers came down to talk about the issues that we all share in common relative to energy costs. That's what a real leader does. She also, when, frankly, Donald Trump and Bobby Kennedy turned their back on vaccines, she did the same thing here with private industry and with public leaders, brought them together and was the first in the nation to say, I'm sorry, your backwards CDC is no longer deciding what is good for vaccines for our families. We're going to do it here in Massachusetts. We actually put a doctor in charge of public health here in Massachusetts rather than Bobby Kennedy, who is the furthest thing from.
We will get into Kimmelgate when our conversation continues. Stay with us.